Up close and personal. A conversation with Prime Minister Barrow. At the halfway point in his second term, Prime Minister Barrow talks about the challenges, the accomplishment, family life, and the way forward.
PM, good morning, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me and to talk about Belize. Your tenure as Prime Minister, I think it's just about 2.5 years since you were re-elected to office. So we're just about halfway, you'd say.
Indeed. No, Steve, let me thank you for agreeing to host this interview. It gives me a chance at what is an opportune juncture, just about the halfway mark, as you said, to talk to people about where we are in the second term, where we hope to go, and what I think are the high points of our tenure to this moment in time.
In 2008, when we were elected to office, my recollection is that the UDP government, or at the time the opposition, campaigned on good governance, bringing good governance to the country, etc. You're now in office, but the idea was to rebuild the confidence of the people. Would you say that what you've done so far, you've been able to do that?
Well, I think it's not been a smooth road, but the course of politics, like the course of true love, never did run smooth. Clearly, we've had some setbacks in terms of the way individual ministers have behaved. And of course, a great deal of attention is focused on that, and rightly so. But you don't want to miss the forest for the trees. The fact is, in terms both of policy prescriptions and in terms of the actions I have tried to take in the face of questionable behavior from ministers, I believe that I can genuinely say that I have made every effort to keep faith with the compact that I made. People mustn't forget that we introduced several pieces of legislation, introduced and passed several pieces of legislation. One is an amendment to the Finance and Audit Reform Act, which now provides for criminal prosecutions to be brought against any minister or public officer who is found to have, in fact, done anything wrong with public monies. That's number one. We've passed regulations to, as it were, revamp the whole tender process to try and ensure again that you don't have the open scandals of the tender process being cooked or the tender process being ignored altogether. So from a policy and legislative point of view, we've tried to do something about proper financial management. And then, because we're human and because people err, with respect to the slippage, and that might be too mild a word, with respect to the difficulties we have encountered in terms of ministers having been caught in wrongdoing, I have certainly acted with alacrity. I have tried to act with certainty, and I have done what was required in the circumstances to deal with those ministers. Now, it doesn't take away from the fact that they did something wrong, and they did something wrong under my watch and under the watch of the United Democratic Party. So we have to live with that. But I say again, there is no way you're ever going to have a perfect government with perfect individuals. And the deal, the undertaking with the public could never have been that I will absolutely prevent any minister from going astray. That's not possible. The deal always was we will have a climate in which going astray will not be tolerated, will not be countenanced. We will have a climate in which the people can be confident that when ministers do make these very serious mistakes, or when, to put it, not to put a fine point on it, when ministers engage in wrongdoing, once they're caught, they will be punished.
Understood. How far are you able to go, considering the slim majority that we're faced with as a government to rein in the ministers?
I think that ultimately people can believe me when I say that I will not allow any consideration to stop me from discharging my duty to the public. Of course, one doesn't say that lightly in the circumstances you've just described, but what it means is, in an Elvin Penner type situation, I will always act as I have acted in terms of the circumstances that were disclosed to me and that the public is so well acquainted with now. In effect, that cuts down our majority. He's no longer treated as a UDP in the House of Representatives. It's up to him whether he wants to vote with the government or not. And there could be no question of my not having proceeded in the fashion I did, simply to try and preserve what is admittedly a slim majority. If somebody else finds himself in the same circumstances as Penner did, I will act in exactly the same way, even though that would further cut the majority. So, of course, one recognizes that if one does what one is obliged to, it can mean an end to the government, which I think would be a huge disaster. But there really is no question about what would have to happen. There's only one call that can be made. And I certainly reiterate my assurances to the public that I will always make that call.
The last administration, the Said Musa administration, I think developed a reputation for probably being the most corrupt administration in the history of our country. How do you respond when people put you in that category by saying that both parties are the same?
Well, two things. When you said you, I'm glad you later on said parties, because certainly at the personal level, anybody who tries to suggest that I, in the office of the Prime Minister, behave in the way the former Prime Minister did has to be just absolutely a fanatic supporter of the opposition, or to be unhinged and to have lost the capacity to see and to reason. It's a little bit of an invidious question, because I don't necessarily want to sound immodest or appear to be blowing my own horn, but facts are facts. I don't operate in the office of the Prime Minister in the way my predecessor operated. And I certainly, personally, and that office, since I've been there, none of us has been involved in any kind of a scandal. You can talk to the business community, you can talk to the ordinary man on the street. I am not for sale. I don't make deals. I don't need to. I am fortunate enough to be able to find my own resources in terms of servicing my constituency. So I hope and believe that nobody tries to say that there's been that kind of a reversal or slippage back to the bad times in terms of the office of the Prime Minister. In terms of the government generally, Well, again, it's a matter of great regret to me that indeed people have started saying, well, you know, your government is just as bad as the last government. That is exaggerated. That is hyperbole. But the fact is that it is the actions of some of the members of my government that those actions have enabled people to start making that huge leap. So as I said, it's troubling to me, and it forces me on the back foot, because I end up having to say, well, look, man, I concede that we have been far from perfect, but my goodness, you're talking about a quantum leap that you're making if you're going to suggest that we're anywhere, or that those in my administration are anywhere near to the level of what we saw previously. But I can't content myself with merely saying we are not nearly as bad as our predecessors. I came to office with a determination that people ought to be able to say, well, you know, the people we voted out were bad, the people we have voted in are good. That has slipped away to a large extent, but I am determined not to give up. I'm determined in my resolve that because of what has happened, and because I keep saying to those who are left in cabinet, let that be a lesson. Let us understand that the public will not tolerate that kind of behavior. Let us absolutely be determined to walk the straight and narrow. And I am hopeful that for the rest of the term, not only will there not be any repetition of the sorts of incidents that we've seen, but that as the work of driving the economy forward continues, as the work of lifting people out of poverty continues, as the work of infrastructural improvement continues, as the work of job creation continues, at the end of the term, people will be able to say, this has been a good government.
Excellent. We've seen recently that the unions have started to, I would say, flex their muscles. Does that bother you? Do you think that they have cause, reason to be out rallying and doing some of the things that they're doing?
It doesn't bother me from an institutional point of view, from a sort of set piece point of view. There are unions, they're supposed to be agitating on behalf of their membership, on behalf of workers. So generally, I am perfectly at ease with it. When you get into specifics, though, when you get into some of the rhetoric they've been employing, and when you get into the details of some of the demands, that is where I think I am obliged to say that in very many cases, in very many areas, they're not being reasonable. But I am determined, as I said not too long ago, I'm determined not to quarrel with them. I will simply try to make my case to the public, and this gives me an opportunity to do so once more, in order to point out how very much the government has done for the unions. This salary increase is, without more, a $37 million per year increase. And we make the point that on top of the salary increase, there was a signing earlier on, some months before, of a partial collective bargaining agreement that conferred on the members of the public service union and the public servants generally, and teachers, all sorts of allowances. So you are looking at what, $44 million added to government's wage bill. This has translated into a 6% across the board salary increase for the public officers and teachers. on top of the 3% annual increase. Again, we concede that not everybody gets the annual increase, but the vast majority, I would say 90% of them get the additional increase. In the context of what is happening regionally,
Yes.
look at Jamaica, where there's a wage freeze. Look at St. Lucia, where the Prime Minister said, either you take a cut in salary or you face retrenchment.
Yes.
Look at Barbados, where there's not even an option. There is, 3,000 person
Yes.
retrenchment exercise that I believe is either ongoing or is just about to start. And I know people don't want to make the comparison, but we don't live in isolation. This is our region. These are small countries. They suffer from the same sorts of challenges that we suffer from. In that kind of a context, that this government has been able to do as much as it is doing now, and this is the month of the raise of pay, I think is something that the unions simply don't give us enough credit for. But I have to continue to engage with them. I have to recognize that they see this as their mission, and perhaps rightly so, and that in terms of the nature of some of the tactics that they employ, I can be dissatisfied with the nature of those tactics, but ultimately it's a matter for them.
The Mayan communal land rights. This has been in the news a lot lately, and I know that it is in the court, it's going through the courts, so I mean we have to be careful to what extent we talk about it. So I'm just going to ask you a sort of general question on it. There's clearly a divide among the general populace as it relates to this issue. Do you have a sense of how this could change the Toledo district and possibly the whole country if we were to take what seems to be occurring to its natural conclusion as it passes through the court?
I don't know if I have a sense, I have a fear.
Okay.
But your point that there is a divide is true not just with respect to the country, but particularly with respect to the very Toledo district.
Okay.
I have met with a number of organizations, and there are others seeking to meet with me from Toledo, who make clear that they certainly are not in favor of any notion that the Mayans should own the entirety of the Toledo district. They certainly are not in favor of any notion that oil prospecting can only take place with the informed consent of certain Mayan leaders, certain Mayan alcaldes, perhaps even certain Mayan villages. And the people I'm talking about who have a different point of view, in the main are Mayas themselves.
Okay.
There is a divide between the newer Mayan villages, places like perhaps Sunderwood and Graham Creek, and the older, longer established Mayan villages, and the bigger Mayan villages such as San Antonio and San Pedro Colombia, to name two of the biggest. You go down there and you talk to the leaders there, and they will tell you they want nothing to do with any notion of communal land rights, and they want oil to be found. All they ask is that there should be some sort of a special set aside for the development needs of the Toledo district. But as you say, up to this point in time, the Mayan activists who espouse this maximalist, as it were, position have prevailed in court in terms of the larger issue of ownership and land rights. We'll see what happens at the CCJ, because even if you concede that they have rights, as the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal in the majority have found, how you define those rights? What actually, are you talking about a sort of unrestricted title, or are you talking about customary rights? And in any event, the question of the mineral rights, which under our constitution belong to the government and people of the country, there is as well going to be a need to reconcile two different concepts, two different legal positions. So to some extent, it's a movable feast, and so we really have to await the kind of clarification that presumably the CCJ will give.
Recent studies have shown a growing demand for agriculture and food products in the region and globally. Our focus really is to have a seamless working relationship with the private sector, for us to understand each other better, literally from the milpa farmers to the mechanized farmers to the food processors. We absolutely need a common agenda, and we're working on it. We have always tended to look at agriculture in terms of its export numbers, and usually you'd get somewhere between $250 to $350 million when you look at export agriculture. However, when you combine it with domestic production, consumption at home, we are well over 600 million.
On a more positive note, I want to try to focus in on a specific area, namely the economy. We have witnessed your government stepping in and what could very well be described as saving the sugar industry. We have also...
I would so describe it indeed.
You would so describe it. Well, we've also seen you do some things on in citrus, but let's talk about citrus, about sugar first. How important would you say is sugar to the Belize industry for us to be pumping more money into it? And I say that in the context of the fact that the glory days when sugar was king is kind of behind us.
Which is not a bad thing, I mean, because we have a more diversified economy now. But sugar, as we all know, is still extremely important, both in terms of contribution to foreign exchange, contribution to GDP, and with respect at the human level to the livelihoods of, 6,000, 7,000 cane farmers, whatever the number is. It's a goodly number, and the economy of the North is, I think it is fair to say, principally dependent on sugar. So very, very important indeed.
During the global economic cycle, depression or what crisis, sugar is one of the areas that performed for us and that I believe kept Belize from going too far down, like our Caribbean neighbors and region. We now see or hear of a large investment taking place in the west of the country now, in sugar as well, right? Seems to be a good thing based on what you've said so far. However, we seem to see that it is being overshadowed by allegations of squatters, farmers squatting and things. Do you think that these people Do we run the risk of chasing away the investors, or do you think they have the resolve to stick with it and see it through to completion?
I think certainly in the case of Green Tropics, with respect to what's happening in the West, but it's a question that may well be asked even more pertinently about ASR and the traditional industry in the North, because as you know, the crop was very late in starting because of this dispute. Even now the dispute has not been resolved, and we heard some outlandish statements being made, particularly from the opposition, suggesting that ASR could look forward to having their property seized, to a nationalization of the factory if the opposition were to come back into government. That is the sort of thing that gave these people pause for thought, and who can blame them? About sugar, look, Trinidad, I think, went out of sugar. St. Kitts, Barbados, Belize has done really well to be able to stay the course, given the erosion of trade preferences in Europe and how things have developed at the WTO and so on. So it's a success story. Of course, BSI was on its last legs until ASR came in. Government had put $10 million in. ASR came, paid back government, and in fact paid off all the debts of BSI and are now the majority owners. They've done more though. They've invested in making the factory more efficient, despite the extremely late start as a consequence of the rains and of the dispute. I just got the figures, or the preliminary figures, yesterday, and the amount of cane delivered and the amount of sugar produced is going to be, the two amounts will be the second highest on record in recent times. I think they came in just a whisker under the 2007 figures, which I believe was the best. Now we're facing some additional problems in terms of markets in about, 2017, because of, again, some changes to the whole EU regime. But this last crop, despite the problems and the success of this last crop, is, I think, an encouragement for all stakeholders to come together. There is no doubt that it's going to be a bit of a difficult road with respect to markets and the EU structure, but there's also no doubt that we can overcome these challenges if we're not going to have the cannibalism almost that will occur if there is not going to be reasonableness on both sides, so that this question of the price for the bagasse can be sorted out.
PM, you made a statement in your 2013 Independence Day speech that I'd like to ask you to elaborate on, but I want to quote you, so I want to get it right, if you don't mind. You said, "We are embarking on nothing less than the creation of a post-independence golden age." Can you elaborate on that?
Well, rhetoric apart, there is no doubt that I was talking, of course, about the infrastructure drive. And there's no doubt that we have embarked on this particular initiative in a way that is unprecedented. You've simply not seen the level of infrastructure activity, the level of infrastructure investment that you're seeing now. And all the economists, all the technical people will tell you that's certainly one sure way to grow your economy. That's one way to stimulate your economy when things are difficult. The sort of old Keynesian model would tell you that you prime the pump, you do the spending. You can't, austerity can't take you out of a recession. But that apart, public works initiatives are always, traditionally from time immemorial, a sure thing in terms of driving a country forward. And because, as I said, the extent of our public works program is unparalleled in the modern history of this country, I felt that I could employ some rhetorical latitude in describing what is happening as a new golden age.
What is the role for Bill, and why do you think this approach was necessary for having Bill?
Well, remember that Bill's efforts and Bill's programs are on top of what government is doing. And let me just remind you of what government is doing qua government, as government. In Belize City, we've financed the city council's second installment of the concreting of streets. We're doing the Chetamal Street Bridge across the river. We've, in fact, done the street that's the extension of Chetamal Street on the south side called Lake Independence Boulevard. We're going to, that bridge will be finished by December, we hope, and that's going to make a huge difference in terms of traffic and convenience. But just the question of uplift is not confined to Belize City. We're doing this all over the country. So we've started now, and I see there was a Facebook question. Maybe I'll be a little premature about what was happening in Coruscant Town and why it hadn't started. Well, it has started. We're concreting the Philip Golson Highway from Social Security right up to Santa Rita Hill. It started. 10 people were taken on, and the kickback was and always is BWS. When we go to concrete streets, they say, but we first have to get our act together in terms of the pipe underneath ground. And it's taking place in every municipality. People look at Belize City because, of course, that's where the bulk of the spending takes place, but it's the largest population center. But it's happening in Dangriga, where apart from 3 or so streets that we've already concreted, government paying for this, we're now doing Ramos Road and Ecumenical Drive. In Punta Gorda Town, we've done all of West Street. We're now going to Olivia Centino Street, I think it's called, and Cayo Street. In Belmopan, that boulevard that goes towards the Lands Department. In any event, I'd be here all day if I tried to list all the individual streets. The fact is that all across the country in the municipalities, starting with the municipalities, in Orange Walk we're doing the Philip Golson Highway throughout the entire length of Orange Walk Town, and we're doing the San Antonio Road. So there is this huge infrastructure effort costing millions and millions and millions of dollars. Bill was conceived of as a special purpose vehicle to allow us to bring $5 million, or not less than $5 million, signature individual projects, again, to all municipalities, but concentrating on sporting complexes, sort of drop-in centers, community areas, community facilities. We wanted to do it through the special purpose vehicle because we thought if we did it through the Ministry of Works in the usual course, through the government, first of all, the ministry would be overwhelmed. But secondly, people will always figure maybe some sort of a fix is in terms of the way contracts are awarded. So we created this special purpose vehicle called Belize Infrastructure Limited, populated by not just officials of the government, but people from the private sector. The Chamber of Commerce has a representative, the National Trade Union Congress of Belize has a representative, the sporting people are on Bill. So what it does is to be able to operate, I think, with greater efficiency than if it had been left to the public sector, simply because, forget the question of capacity constraints, but as I said, Ministry of Works would have been overwhelmed. So there's greater efficiency and there's also greater transparency. Despite all the laws we can pass about proper financial management, I think people are more comfortable knowing that there are these social partner watchdogs unbilled. The program has started. We began first in the Cayo district. We've been moving to other areas, and ultimately, as I said, when we're done, each district town would have in fact seen either the construction of a new facility or the improvement of some old facility to the tune of not less than $5 million each.
This labor-intensive program we have going on with these development projects, but
well, I say only half jokingly, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So if they're really paying, I must really.
But how have it been giving you the benefits you had envisioned?
Yes, man, and I certainly want to congratulate people like John Woods, who started the model of employing at-risk young people. The employment will be there in any event because government is footing this huge bill, and all this activity means there's a need for employees. But Woods started this concept of employing at-risk people. It's also been working very well with contractors such as RJB, Romel Berges. Now, we saw right at the start of the initiative that certainly in Belize City, the gang violence seemed to have gone all the way down. There's been a spike recently, and there are particular reasons for that. But we are very much satisfied that the model that we are employing does two things. It gives people who are usually at the margins a chance at a living wage, and it does, in fact, help to keep a lid on the urban violence.
In more recent times, we see the emergence of the National Bank. Do we run the risk with our policies of triggering or causing a bank failure or a shock to the banking system if we're not careful with the policies and regulations that we put in place and contain in the banks?
Well, you're a banker and you know about these things far more than I do. And I believe your question is timely, but that has nothing to do with the National Bank. The National Bank, sure, part of the idea, apart from giving people access to an additional source of funding, was to drive down rates at the commercial banks. And that's started to happen. It happened first in mortgage financing, but it's happening pretty much all across the board. But two things. The commercial banks can afford to drop rates, man. After all, the deposit rates the spread of the commercial banks has continued to increase. Even though lending rates have come down, deposit rates have come down far more. And then the National Bank does not yet have, and will not for some time have, the critical mass that can really put the sort of pressure on any individual commercial bank that would cause that bank to be driven out of business. So we might reach, we will sometime in the future reach a point at which we will occupy the kind of space that will mean that traditional commercial banks who can't compete might be in some trouble. But that's the way of the world, and certainly there is a huge good in what the National Bank has already done. I believe they've approved over $17 million in loans. They've disbursed over $10 million in loans. We started off by giving them $20 million. There is an additional $10 million in the pipeline. I had to say to Mr. Grant, that math is giving me a headache because it means sooner rather than later, the $20 million would be enough. But we're perfectly prepared to put more money. At that huge spot on Lake Independence Boulevard where we're going to do some public sector buildings. We're going to do a government complex. We're going to build a headquarters for the National Bank. We're going to build a new headquarters for the DFC. When we do that sort of thing, it does mean that the bank will be spreading its wings even more. But I'm saying that the demand for the bank's credit, the demand to access the credit of the bank has been overpowering. It's without a doubt one of the finest success stories of the government, and we will continue to drive it forward.
How would you describe your relationship with the private sector, the relationship between government and the private sector? One on the front from, say, public and private sector partnerships, and more generally, if you will.
We're making an effort to put things on an even keel. We will not always be able to do what the private sector wants, and no government will, but we want to do more than just pay lip service to the role of the private sector in what from time immemorial has been called driving the engine of growth. Two things though, or one particular thing, even as we make the effort to have a partnership, and there's been this Economic Development Council that we've chartered, I think we have to recognize that the private sector is not just the merchandising sector, not just the mercantile or the commercial sector. The productive sector is a huge part of the private sector, and nobody can say that government hasn't partnered magnificently with the productive sector. Those bailouts that you talked about, citrus, sugar, and we've done a great deal in bananas as well. So from that point of view, I believe if you spoke to the productive sector, you would find that they're very happy with government. Perhaps less so in terms of the merchandising sector, but we are working at it. We are trying to help. We recognize that there's the regulatory environment in this country needs to be improved. We recognize that, again, public sector officials have to do a better job at servicing the public generally, and certainly the private sector. But we're working at it, and we hope that we're in the middle of producing certainly a culture change.
The overall mandate of Bill was really put together as an execution unit under the government of Belize in order to establish sporting facilities, and that's the main goal right now throughout the country of Belize. The overall budget is $60 million to be distributed throughout all the different districts, and of course the biggest of projects being the rehabilitation of the Civic Center site with a new facility.
There has been a lot of adverse criticism about the nationalization of BTL and BEL. How have these entities performed since? And with hindsight, do you think that it was worth it?
Well, first of all, That criticism, in my view, is confined to a minority. We did a little survey, and the majority of the people in this country, a significant majority, still applaud the nationalization, you know. And I think they do so both because they see it as a paramount act of sovereignty and nationalism, but also because I think they've seen benefits from the nationalization. BL just had its annual general meeting. It put out its annual report, and BL is going great guns. And one of the things I noted was they say that their community involvement is at an all-time high. Power outages is at an all-time low. So service is improving, and of course now the rates have gone back down. They had gone down, gone up, and now have come back down. With respect to telemedia, man, now you have VoIP, you could FaceTime, you could Skype, you could whatever. Rates have gone down from the time of the introduction of per minute or per second billing, whatever it is. International rates are at an all-time low. So there have been huge advantages, both psychological in terms of or pride as a country, and practical in terms of lower rates and, in my view, better service.
Our society seems to be heading towards a true pluralistic society. Special interest groups fighting for different things. In particular, we're seeing shifts in how society views things like gender, sexuality, journalism, and just a broader expression of self, of oneself. How different is society and politics today from when you started, I think about, what, 30 years ago?
Vastly different, vastly different. As you say, the winds of change that have blown globally had ultimately to find their way to our own country. It is a far more complex society, far less homogeneous. The role of the media we've seen an explosion in the influence of the media. We've seen the phenomenon of social partner activism. It's ultimately, in the context of the evolution of society, something that is unstoppable. And while there are aspects of it that I don't particularly care for, on balance, I think it has been a good thing.
Recently, it was announced that the government will assist with the cost of the CXCs. But the expansion of the programs from just the primary school to the secondary schools, is that the objective?
Oh, primary school was always free, but what the Esquivel administration did was to propose what was then called free education at the secondary level. The program took a beating because it turned out that we were talking about free tuition. It turned out that there were all sorts of fees additional to tuition. And so people said, well, it's not really free secondary education. And fine, it's an argument that's too old to rehash. The government did exactly what it promised or what it meant when it said free secondary education. Since it was free at primary school, and that always meant whatever tuition there was, government would pay for, we thought it would mean the same for secondary schools. So that's there, but we keep trying to add to this thing. We introduced the subsidies for first and second formers, and now, moving right along, we are going to pay for 6 CXCs for all deserving students.
I have some questions from Facebook. We invited people to participate via Facebook. From Hyacinth Isigiri. Why build up Belize as a country that prioritizes its green status, then mock the international conservation community by allowing extraction in protected areas and World Heritage sites?
Well, I don't know that there's any extraction in World Heritage sites. It's a very loaded question. Nobody's mocking the environmental community. It's always a balancing act. You can't completely sideline development because your preoccupation with the environment is so extreme. There has to be a way to do both. And this question of certainly of oil extraction from a terrestrial national park has gone all the way to the Court of Appeal, or the question of whether the government is entitled to do activities in a national park that the environmentalists say are not consistent with the nature of a national park. And Mendes, the Trinidadian Justice of Appeal, who's now gone elsewhere, made the point that no, man, the balancing act means that government can do pretty much anything in the national park that's consistent with development and that will not alter fundamentally the nature of the national park. So if you have a national park of thousands of acres and you take 10 acres to serve as a kind of launch pad for the drilling of oil, that doesn't alter the fundamental nature of the national park. That sort of extremist position is understandable on the part of activists, but a government who has to see the whole picture simply cannot take a similar point of view.
Aria Lightfoot asks, Mr. PM, do you have a plan to include the diaspora in the political process? Keep in mind that Belizeans who give up their citizenship also give up their social security and other benefits they are entitled to and work for. Many countries have embraced the idea of keeping a necessary tie with the diaspora of their citizenship, and hopefully Belize can at least begin the process to acquire information, pros and cons of pursuing this route.
Well, we are very much involved in trying to get the diaspora to participate in the development of Belize. There is a diaspora desk in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Mendes, particularly in the United States, and High Commissioner Perdomo in the UK, always reach out to Belizeans and try to see how their particular skills might be able to assist our country, and try to encourage those who would want to come back and invest to do so. I just saw a paper in Cabinet yesterday where we are going to be offering additional incentives to Belizeans who are in the diaspora who want to come back home. But I believe Ira is talking particularly about the candidacy of dual citizens. Yes, I had what I thought was a perfectly sensible, practical, and necessary idea that these people should be allowed to run for office in this country. We needed to change the constitution for that to take place. We proposed it, and we were hauled out of town by the media and by the political opposition. I suppose we could have rammed it through because at that time we had the requisite majority in the House, but we listened to the crescendo of complaints, and we did not proceed. I would hope that the day will come when we can revisit this, but it simply can't be done in circumstances where the government doesn't have, or whoever wishes to do it, doesn't have either the support of the opposition or a unilateral majority. As I said, Aria can perhaps criticize us for not staying the course, because when we did have the majority and proposed it, we didn't follow through. Other people might say, well, that's in the best tradition of democracy. We listened to what appeared to be the majority sentiment in this country against people with dual citizenship, Belizeans with dual citizenship standing as candidates. I will say again that I absolutely think it's the right way to go, and I repeat that I would hope that the time will come when others, or the majority will feel that we will be similarly persuaded.
On your family life, there's always this issue for working people to balance between work and family. And the role of Prime Minister, there was a time I'm convinced that I do not want your job. How difficult was it?
There are times, admittedly very few, when I am convinced I don't want that.
How difficult was it for you when you received that confirmation that your wife had stage 3 breast cancer?
Well, not as difficult as it was for her. Yeah. It's hopefully in the past now. Hopefully it won't come back. Yeah. But it's not something that I particularly care to dwell on. Yeah. We were able to, or she was able to undergo the full regimen of treatment, and I was able to accompany her and to be with her throughout, and I don't think that governance in Belize suffered for it, and yeah. So that's that.
I think she won the hearts of Belizean in still sticking with those various causes even through her illness.
Well, I don't want to talk about my role, but I can talk about her role all day if you wish, because I do believe that she's done a phenomenal job, and clearly I'm biased, but I suspect that the majority of right-thinking Belizeans would agree. So I certainly salute her, as do a whole lot of other citizens of this country. Yes.
How does Dean Barrow relax? Between work, you seem to always be on the go, and clearly your family life. I mean,
simple things. I read a great deal whenever, and I don't mean reports and data and that sort of stuff. I mean current affairs and literature and some current novels. That's really my chief source of recreation. I do watch a lot of television, excluding the local news. And whenever I can, I absolutely enjoy swimming, or being at Placencia or at the Keys for a couple of days. So whenever a long weekend comes up, I try to do that. I don't take extended holidays abroad. On trips, I would maybe spend an extra day or two, and that's sufficient for me because I quickly get bored. But basically, reading, television, and swimming when I can, and being with my family on weekends, and that's it.
What would you say are your administration's greatest accomplishments since you took office in 2008?
Let me see, how shall I count the ways? Oh no, on a serious note, it's always an awkward question because again, you don't want to come off as boastful. And I have been accused of that in the past. I don't think laterally. But I would start with the revival of the DFC. Okay. Just the other day we passed a resolution in the National Assembly to allow the DFC to borrow $20 million from SSB. Remember that when we took office, the DFC was utterly busted, and the international financial institutions, in particular, the IDB said, we're not going to lend you any money, not for the DFC, at all, if you insist on reviving the DFC. And we said, no, this was a hugely successful, necessary development institution, and we'll be darned if we'll allow it to just lie there and die there. And so we went to CDB and we got some money, all sorts of things we had to meet, all sorts of stipulations to ensure that the bad old days would not occur. But we did it, and the DFC has not just gotten back up on its feet, it's been going from strength to strength. And the role it plays in terms of lending for education, for home construction, rural credit, agricultural credit, stuff like that, is hugely important. So I would tick that off right away, because we did that at the start of the administration. Then, of course, I would get on to the nationalization, which we've spent some time on already, so I won't get into any details, just to say that I consider that still to be perhaps our finest hour. Naturally, extremely important, the pro-poor policies. There is no question but that we've helped a significant number of people to do better by way of the food pantry program, by way of the conditional cash transfer, the loan write-offs, millions and millions of dollars. All those things have helped people tremendously. The renegotiation of the super bond when everybody said it couldn't be done. And that's similar to the food pantry, When I first discussed that thing with officials, they said it can't happen for people who are thief. Not thief, because you will sell them for half price. They will turn around and sell for full price. The people who are running the program will steal the food. We persevered, and that thing has done a bang-up job. Similarly, with the renegotiation of the super bond, I announced it from before the re-election, and everybody said, "You're crazy. It can't happen." Well, it happened, and it's a huge accomplishment of which I am enormously proud. When you add to that the National Bank, about which we've also spoken, similarly, officials, experts said to me, "This is a duplication of effort, man. Put the money in the DFC." And I said, "No, I want a national bank to serve a specific purpose, or to serve a number of purposes, including bringing rates down." And that thing has taken off like a rocket. So those are, I think, I'm sure there are other things I'm forgetting, but those are the main highlights of our accomplishments to date, I believe.
What will be Dean Barrow's legacy after he leaves office?
It's an impossible question to answer. Your legacy is what people describe it to be, or agree that it is. But for me, we've talked about some of the concrete achievements. For me, what is most important is if the majority of my countrymen and women will feel, when I should have left office, that I acted throughout my tenure on the basis of personal honesty and rectitude. That is critical. We've talked about some of the difficulties I've had with members of cabinet. We've talked about some of the difficulties that the government has encountered, where we've seen things gone awry, and we've not been able honestly to say that we have governed in a spotless, Simon Pure, absolutely clean fashion. I'm saying that whatever has gone wrong, we need to put right as a government. But for myself, if people feel at the end that I did my best, even if that best wasn't good enough, but that personally, I did not lose sight of my charge not to violate the public trust by any kind of dishonesty, any kind of deal making, any kind of secret maneuvering, I would be the happiest person on earth.
Now, looking ahead over the next 2.5 years from your administration?
Well, to some extent, more of the same, especially with respect to infrastructure. There are people who say this isn't sustainable. Well, it's certainly sustainable through 2.5 more years. So let me just be clear on that. We mean physically to transform this country, no question. And I think we have the wherewithal, the financial resources to do it. So there's that. But people have also said, fine, what do you do about positioning the country and the economy generally in terms of where we possibly have comparative advantages, or with respect to a growing population, a growing number of entrants into the workforce. And we're certainly going to have already indicated, we're certainly going to do at the micro level call center training. We're going to actually set up a curriculum and courses, and we're going to invite people to enlist in a training program, because that business outsourcing, it's not just call centers. That business outsourcing can be a huge earner for the country and can be a huge driver of employment. But a lot of people, they worry about our small size. They also worry about the lack of a trained workforce in that regard. And they don't want to do the training on the job. So we already floated a trial balloon. Mike Singh did a one-off course under Beltrade and the Ministry of Investment for some call center training, and it was successful. So we're going to do that. We're going to take it to the districts as well. We're going to expand the apprenticeship program, which again has been wonderfully successful. We're going to bring back the Centers for Employment Training. Remember that thing went the way of all flesh when some external agencies said, well, no, you move now to IT VET, the Institutes of Technical and Vocational Training. But IT VETs require a degree of qualifications before you can even enter. The huge advantage of the Centers for Employment Training was that they were designed to capture people who did not go to high school or did not finish high school, but who are good or potentially good with developing trade skills. So we're going to bring back the Centers for Employment Training. At the larger level, we are determined to create a sort of university or university-level institute of technology. Minister Grant is working with the Koreans on this. They have already agreed to come and do the feasibility studies, talk to all possible stakeholders. We want to site the building on the UB campus. And remember, they will probably provide all the financing, but if government has to build the building, government will do it. That can act as a magnet for people from within the region. But that can also help to position us in the so-called new economy. Information technology, apart from this institute, this university-level institution that we hope to charter and accredit, information technology. I am in awe of information technology because I'm basically a technology dunce. But I'm smart enough to realize how absolutely critically important it is. We've got to make better use of information technology, and we've got to train people in information technology. We've been talking to Dr. Carla Barnett, who returns home shortly, to actually take forward the kind of study and exercise and initiative that will see us come up with the concrete ways in which we can properly train people in information technology, and which, as a government, in terms of capacity building, in terms of effective delivery of services, how we can make use of information technology. So that and the actual institute, people have talked about the absence of anything replacing the Belize Technical College. Again, the younger generation, it does date me and it does date you that we know and value so much the Belize Technical College. Well, this Institute of Technology that we want to charter will be a Belize Technical College for the modern era. That's certainly one of the big ticket items that I want to see go forward. We need to develop that commerce by port. The whole question of transportation and what we do to improve the effectiveness of transportation, both for internal purposes and as a spur to investment, that's also going to be another big ticket item. So there's all sorts of stuff that we've been mulling over and that we're determined to move forward with.
Is Dean Barrow going to lead the UDP into the next general elections?
I have every intention of doing so. Only health or some calamitous misfortune with my family can prevent that. So I am ready, willing, and actually eager to go again. And perhaps this gives me an opportunity to say something that I wanted to a little bit earlier when you were talking about legacy. I've taken my lumps, I've taken my licks. There are times when I believe that the media and the social partners are laying siege to the government, and I take these things personally. I don't mean in terms of wanting to pursue any vendetta against them, but they give me sleepless nights, and as a human being, I sometimes wonder, is it all worth it? But I come back with the answer resoundingly yes.
Okay.
It has been a great honor and privilege to serve this country. And I don't just say that in a pro forma way. Two things. In my own party, the tremendous support and love that I get is worth paying pretty much any price for. And beyond my own party, I don't know that it is the majority, but there are so very many Belizeans from all walks of life. I go to the supermarket myself. I go to the meat pie place myself. I go to the barbecue stall myself. I don't get out to the districts to do campaigning much because of my back. When I'm returning from trips abroad, you always meet Belizeans in the waiting area at the airport. And pretty much uniformly, pretty much unfailingly, people have been kind. People say to me, we appreciate your efforts. We believe you're doing a good job. And that absolutely makes up for all the slings and the arrows of the opposition, of the Facebook kings and queens who delight in launching their online attacks. I hold no grudge against anyone. As I said, this is a freewheeling, rambunctious democracy, and sometimes people go a little bit far in terms of the level of the personal attacks. But more than compensating is this business, as I said, of regular folk meeting you in public places and saying, good job.
And I want to say, PM, that it has really been an honor for me to sit and talk with you. I think your knowledge of the issues, your understanding of the system and how the country is run is acclaimed by everyone. That everybody knows that. So sitting down and listening to you articulate what is happening without having to be prompted, any prompters, etc., says to me that you're very much in tune and an integral part of what is happening, and I think that of itself is actually a good sign for me. It's been an honor talking with you, and I want to thank you for spending the last couple hours together sitting down talking.
Well, Steve, let me thank you. As I said, your having agreed to conduct this session, this conversation, this interview, however you want to term it, has been, for me, a great boon. I'm grateful to you. You will take some licks, you know that, for having done this, and obviously you could care less, but still, as one who's accustomed to taking licks, I know that it can sometimes be unpleasant, as I said earlier. So for that reason, as for so many others, I thank you. I'm grateful to you.
You're welcome.